We're kind of in this theme of service for the month. Next month we will move into Thanksgiving, but this month we're in a theme more or less on service in some way, shape, or form. It may not be about service, but it's going to be connected to service in some way. And we're going to be in Matthew 18 today. If someone, once you get there in those black pew Bibles, if someone would holler out that number, Matthew 18, that page number. And what we're going to be talking about today is forgiveness. We're going to be talking about forgiveness today. What's that? 695. About forgiveness. And the question is going to arise, how many times am I supposed to forgive someone? And that's a question that's going to be asked. And this really isn't just a theoretical question. And I think we've all experienced, or if you haven't yet, you're going to experience at some point in your life the issue of forgiveness. And not just with people in general, but oftentimes with a specific person. Sometimes it's our kids. If you're a parent that has older kids, sometimes you know that your kids can cause you much heartache. Maybe it's a family member. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's a coworker. But someone that you get to the point you're saying, okay, how many times do I need to forgive? How many times is this going to keep going on? And at some point in our lives, we're all probably, unless you live an extremely wonderful life, we're all going to experience that at some point. How many times do I have to forgive someone? So we're going to look at that today, but we're also going to get it connected to service. You say, well, what in the world does that have to do with service? I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. Well, we're going to find out. We're going to find out here. So let's look at this parable, or it's not a parable, it's going to be a parable, but Matthew chapter 18. And we're going to start in verse 21. And I'm going to be reading from a little different version from what you have. It'll follow along. You should be able to follow along pretty well. Then Peter came up and said to him being Jesus, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? So again, Peter probably has someone in mind. How many times is James or someone going to sin against me, and do I have to forgive them? How long does this cycle have to go on? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 70 times 7, or 77 times, depending on how you render that. And so Jesus gives the answer here. Jesus gives the answer. How many times do I have to forgive someone? Peter asks, how many times do I have to forgive someone who sins against me, maybe even habitually? And what's Jesus' answer? Yeah. It's not like Jesus is coming up with a number and saying, well, 7 times 7, okay, you have to forgive them 49 times. Or it's not like you have to forgive them 7 times. Jesus' implied answer is, you continually forgive them. And so Jesus then launches into a parable to explain what he's talking about. Verse 23, Therefore the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his servants. When he began to settle, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. And since he could not pay, his master ordered him to be sold with his wife and children and all that he had, and payment to be made. So the servant fell on his knees, imploring him, Have patience with me, and I will pay you everything. And out of pity for him, the master of that servant released him and forgave him. The debt. Forgave him the debt. And if you look at this, some of your Bibles may have like a footnote or a reference there. The amount here that this servant owed is almost absurd. It's just over the top. Do any of you have any footnotes? How much is a talent worth? What's that? Yeah. A talent is essentially what we think, what the conclusions our archaeologists or whatever and historians have come to is a talent is essentially worth about a year's wages. So 1 talent is worth a year's wages. So I think the average income for the average American, or the average income for an American, is like $50,000 or something. So you take $50,000, and then times that by, 20? You get 1 talent, 20 years worth of wages. So what's 500,000 times 20? It's $1 million. $1 million. But that's only one talent. So then you times that by 10,000, $1 million by 10,000, and you get an approximation of how much this guy owed. And if he's got an average income of $500 or $50,000, is he ever going to pay off $1 million times 10,000? Not doing what he's currently doing. So the amount here is nearly absurd. There's no way this man is ever going to pay off the debt that he owes to the king. It's not going to work. The servant's not going to get it done. But what does the servant do? If you notice in verse 26, the servant fell on his knees imploring him, have patience with me. It didn't say like, have mercy on me. He says, have patience with me, and what? I will pay you everything. And isn't that how we work, though, as people? We kind of talked about this last week. Don't we work out of, well, let me pay it off? And that's probably, in most instances, a good thing. You know, we all don't want to be a bunch of moochers mooching off of the king or whomever. That's how we work. We pay things off, don't we? When we owe something, we want to work to pay it off. But in this case, the servant is never going to pay off the debt that he owes. Come on, have patience with me. I will pay you everything. And what's the king's response here in verse 27? Yeah, and out of pity for him, the master of that servant released him and forgave him the debt. We talked last week about the division, the difference between what? Between religion and the gospel, didn't we? The difference between religion and gospel. This servant shows us religion at work, shows us kind of our response. You know, religion at work is what? What did we talk about last week if you were here? What is religion, and how is this servant practicing religion here in verse 26? Anybody have any ideas? You got to be here last week, though, to get this. Religion is what? People earning their way to God, isn't it? So what does this man attempt to do? He attempts to pay off the debt that he owes by working. Remember, this is a parable. It's talking about something a little deeper than just money. You know, the implication is we all owe a debt that we can't pay to God. And what is that debt? Well, it's essentially the debt for kind of all the junk and all the sin and all the evil that's in our lives that we just can't quite get rid of. You know, no matter how hard we try, we're not going to get rid of those things. You know, when we try to clean, you know, we've probably all done that. You know, we've all tried to clean up our act, and what happens? It never really gets cleaned up. You know, we might, like a kid cleaning her room, like Fiona cleaning her room. Like when I was a kid, I cleaned. You know, what does a kid do when you're supposed to clean your room? Usually you shove everything under the bed, or you shove everything in the closet. And so when your mom or dad comes in and just takes a glance, it looks clean, good job. But you open the closet door, and like in the cartoons, everything comes flooding out. Or you look under the bed, and everything's been just crammed under the bed. And, you know, that's what we can do. You know, we can kind of spot clean, but we've really not paid off the debt, have we? And that's religion, is our attempt to pay off a debt to God that we cannot owe or cannot pay off, just like the servant. And that's really essentially the first point of the parable is, man alive, you know, we've got this debt, and we as humans attempt to pay it off. And that's just who we are. It's who we are in our nature, is we attempt to pay off a debt that we can't pay off. And as we talked about last week, then this isn't true Christianity. That's not the true gospel. The true gospel isn't about us paying off a debt that we owe. The true gospel is in verse 27, isn't it? The gospel is out of pity for him, the master of that servant released him and forgave the debt. It's grace and it's mercy that the king showed to the servant by forgiving an outrageous debt that could never be paid. And essentially, that's what God does for us, doesn't he? Through Christ, he pays off the debt that we owe, that we could never pay off by all the good things that we do. And you know, we do that. You know, we do that. Whether you're a Christian or whether you're not a Christian, you know, that we have that mindset. We have that nature that if I work hard enough, if I do enough good things, it's all going to pay off. You know, again, last week, if the debits outweigh the credits, if the positives outweigh the negatives, it's going to be okay. But that's not the way it works. The way it works is forgiveness and grace and mercy, like the king showed the servant here. Now, for some reason, I think it's just part of who we are. You know, we always think that, you know, do you know the story that, you know, the little engine that could? You have that as a kid, or read that to your kids. And what does a little engine say as he's trying to get up the hill? Yeah, I think I can. And that's who we are, isn't it? You know, it's I think I can. And we're not going to get to the top of the hill. And as we're continuing to say, I think I can, God's saying, I know you can, because that's why I sent Jesus. You know, and that's the difference. That's the difference between religion and Christianity, or true Christianity. Because if we admit it, I think the tendency of even Christians is to slide back into religion, isn't it? We can be in the gospel, in grace and forgiveness, that God has paid this off through Christ and we can't make it. But over time, we just seem to slide back into, if I work hard enough, or to keep God to like me, or to keep myself in good grace, I need to do certain things. And we continually slide back into religion and lose sight of the gospel. So no matter who we are, whether we're not Christians and need a true look at gospel, or whether we are Christians and we continually need to be reminded that our faith operates like the king operates with the servant, forgiving a debt that we can't pay off. We continually need to be reminded of the gospel. So you might then say, oh man, you talked about this last week, aren't you? He's like beating a dead horse. And so I think the response to that is, it's probably a horse that needs to be beaten then, isn't it? Because we continually slide back into that. I continually slide back to that. I think it's the nature of who we are. Even as redeemed people who have been cleansed and reformed by Christ, we still tend to sway towards getting things done by paying off a debt that we can't owe. And that's part of Paul's arguments in a lot of his letters that he writes. Don't rely on the things that you do. Those come afterwards. The focus is on Christ. It's on His grace and on His mercy. So again, it's a dead horse that needs to be beaten, or maybe that's not a, get into animal abuse or something there. So, you know, and this is, before we move on to the second, you know, it's something that we can't lose sight of. It's something that we need to keep a hold of, that following Christ is the way of grace and of mercy and of the cross, and of relying upon that and not upon anything else that we might do or anything else that we might say. So let's keep moving here and let's finish up, because obviously this isn't where the parable ends. There's more to it than this. Verse 28, but when that same servant, the same servant who had the large debt paid off, the enormous debt paid off, went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii, and seizing him, he began to choke him, saying, pay what you owe. So this fellow servant fell down and pleaded with him, have patience with me, I will pay you. Exact same thing the first servant said. He refused and went and put him in prison until he should pay the debt. When his fellow servants saw what had taken place, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their master all that had taken place. Then his master summoned him and said to him, you wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. And should not you have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you? And in his anger his master delivered him to the jailers until he should pay his debt. So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. So the ratio of the debts is roughly 6,000 to 1. If you want to do the math there, from what the first guy owed to what the second guy owed, the denarii, or the denarius, is a lot less than the talent. So it's about a 6,000 to 1 ratio. The first servant had been shown much grace, and what didn't he do? He didn't show his fellow servant the same grace that had been showed to him. It's kind of like, you know, with our kids. You know, if you give a kid, your child, a toy or something, and he or she is supposed to share it. And what do they often do? Yeah, it's mine. I don't want to share it. And then as a parent, you're kind of like, what do you mean you don't want to share it? It's not yours. I just gave it to you. I just gave it to you. Share it. It's not yours. And the same thing is kind of going on here, isn't it? That the master, the king, it's like, what are you doing? This grace isn't yours. I shared it with you. Turn and share it with somebody else. So it brings us really to the heart of the parable, the second point of the parable, and that is what? It's that the grace that is shown to us, from whom? From God, we are to turn and show to others. The grace that is shown us, we are to turn and to show others. Or perhaps, let's put it in a different way, maybe a way even a little easier. The truly forgiven person forgives others. So perhaps then this first servant really didn't embrace the gift of grace, the forgiveness that was given to him. It doesn't say that, but I think that's fair. Maybe he didn't truly embrace the forgiveness and grace that was shown him. So he had no grace, forgiveness to dispense to anyone else. And what happens then? The master, the king, is angry, and essentially, what do you call it? He takes it back, or he rescinds his offer to him. And I don't want to get into any implications of that. That's not important. It's not the point. The point, though, is that the truly forgiven person then turns and shows forgiveness to others. That's the heart of this gospel message here today. And this is what the gospel does for us. Linking the first point to the second point. It transforms us at a deep level, doesn't it? That's what the gospel does. That's the power of the gospel. See, it just doesn't do something for us. That's a mistake sometimes we make. Okay, great. God has forgiven me. Christ has done this work for me. I'm good to go on my way. But the parable's deeper than that, isn't it? The gospel transforms us into the kind of people that do what? Yeah, that forgive, that turn that gospel outward, that live it out. It's not just something that happens to us and we're good to go. It's something that changes the reality of who we are to where we become grace givers, those who forgive others as Christ has forgiven us. Because what? If we're like the first servant, a debt has been paid for us that what? We can't ever pay. And so if somebody else owes us a debt that they can't pay to us, what should our response be to that? Say the same as God's, isn't it? The same as God's response to us. So in a society, and it's not just our society, any society, just who we are people who demand repayment. We demand, it's tit for tat. An eye for an eye, if you want to use the biblical term for that. But something changes when the gospel gets a hold of us, doesn't it? Something changes. And we show, live, dispense the same grace and mercy that was given to us. So you might ask, what in the world has this to do with service? What in the world does this have to do with anything about going out there and serving? Everything. It's got everything to do with going out there on two levels. The first level is the first point of the parable, is that whenever we engage in acts of service or good works, whatever you want to put that, we've got to remember why we are doing it, don't we? Why are we not doing good works of service in connection to what we just talked about with this first servant? Why aren't we doing good works of service? Anybody make that connection? Yeah. If we're doing good works of service in order to what? To earn our way to God or to earn God's smiley face, we're doing it for the wrong reasons. That's never going to cut it. That's never going to pay off that debt. It's never going to get us anywhere. It's not going to get us in God's good graces. Because why? Because that's not the gospel message. Again, what is the gospel message? Huh? Yeah, I mean, the gospel message is we owe a debt that can't be paid, and then who paid it for us? Christ paid it for us. That's the gospel message. We have to remember that whenever we engage in service, is that this is gospel-oriented. It's not works-oriented. They are good works, but those always flow out of the gospel, out of grace. We can't ever get the cart before the horse. Our good works don't make us into good people, do they? We're good people because of whom? Christ. And then our works flow out of that. We always have to remember that when dealing with service. So what's the other point of this then? The other point is related to this parable is what? Why do we engage in works of service, even maybe for people who owe us things? Why? Okay, we're called to. Link it a little bit more to the parable we just talked about. Because of what has been done for us. Yeah, because of the grace, the mercy, the forgiveness that has been shown for us, we can turn and show that grace, that forgiveness, and mercy for others. So, what does all this mean? What difference does it make in my life? How do we know if we are serving out of a gospel heart or out of a religious heart? That's a hard question, isn't it? How do I know if I'm serving with the right motives? Does anybody ever struggle with that? Anybody ever think about that? Maybe not. Maybe nobody thinks about that. I don't know. Okay. What am I getting out of it? Oftentimes if you watch the news or something like that, if someone stops to help a person on the road with a flat tire, or if they pull a person from a burning home or whatever, you know what the often response is to, why did you do that? Anybody have a guess? Yeah, sometimes. More often than not, though, you will hear, because if I found myself in that situation, I would want somebody to do it for me. And that's okay as far as it goes. But again, in a way, that's kind of religion-oriented, isn't it? I'll do it so in case I get in that situation, somebody will pay me back for it. Somebody will do the same for me. But gospel is, it doesn't really matter if I ever get that back, because Christ showed me ultimate forgiveness and grace. I'm going to do that for other people. So yeah, examining why we do things, I think, is a step in the right direction. And we could ask ourselves some other questions. Am I doing this in a way to earn myself to God? I think that's a good question to ask. Do I think I'm getting myself in God's good graces by doing this? And again, it's not that we shouldn't do those things, because obviously we should, but it's the mindset. It's the thrust behind it. Am I earning my way to God through this, or am I simply doing it out of a heart that's thankful for what He has done already for me? Secondly, we can ask the question, what is my response to people who owe me something? Can't we answer? We should probably be answering that question. What is my response to those people who owe me something? I think our natural tendency is to what? It's to get mad servant, or the first servant, and choke the guy out when we think, holy mackerel, God didn't choke me out even though I owed Him a lot more. So I think that, thinking about those things, how do I react to people that either do owe me something or I perceive owe me something? We never want to be the people, do we? We never want to be the person who owes somebody else something. If you do something for somebody, they owe you one. Or if you do something, well, you know what I mean. I got that backwards. But, you want to pay those off. You don't want to be in debt to somebody else. And so we always like to earn our way out of that. But I think God would say, it doesn't really matter anymore, does it? It doesn't matter. You were in debt beyond belief to me, and I took care of it. Do the same. I'll just wrap up. I had a little kind of funny, quick story. There's a rabbi, his name was David Nelson. He told the story of two brothers who came to him to settle a long-standing feud. And the rabbi got the two brothers to kind of reconcile their differences. And it was the Jewish New Year, and he said, all right, before you guys leave, I want you to wish something for the other brother, out of the goodwill of your hearts after having this reconciled. And so the one brother says to the other one, brother, I wish you the same thing that you wish me. And the other brother said, oh, Rabbi, he's doing it again. He's starting back up again. That it doesn't matter what others do to us. It doesn't matter, because when we are secure in the gospel, in the grace of God, that He has forgiven us a debt that we can't pay off anyway. It transforms to the core the kind of people that we are. Let's close in prayer today. Father, thank you for, first of all, for Christ, for His work on the cross for us, and for grace and for the gospel. Please just impress upon us the need for the gospel, that we never lose sight of that. If we've slidden a little bit in that direction towards religion and away from gospel, bring us back. Forgive us for doing that. If we've never been there, if we've never taken a hold of that grace, of that gospel, Lord, enable us to do that now, to move into that. We don't have to work for it, but it's a gift. It's given freely by you. Let us bask in that. Let us embrace that. Let us live in that and go out and service from there. Father, let us leave here being grace-filled, gospel-filled people. Not keeping it to ourselves, but turning out and showing that to others and telling others about it and living that in front of others, Lord. Give us the power to do this. And may it be for your glory and your honor. In Jesus' name, amen. So stand with me this morning. We'll have our benediction. Go today just in the grace of God, embracing that. Live that this week. May you go in peace.